All right. Proverbs chapter 22. We will be in Proverbs a bunch today, so if you want to put a little piece of paper in there or something just to give you a reference. This might seem like an oddball verse to start with, but I think you'll get it after I get going here. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. And that reads, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he won't depart from it. The subject this morning is political correctness. And although the message might not apply to everybody in here as such, most of the adults are past that stage. But there are people who will ultimately hear this that maybe they can glean something and get something from it. We live in a culture that we are, especially these last few years, this last generation, we are totally and completely bound in this country now by political correctness. It has risen to such a level that had you not gone through it, in other words, I've lived over 70 years having experienced this thing on an incremental basis. Now, if you had taken me at 25, let's say, and I went into suspended animation and came out at 70, and I had missed, all those intervening years, and now all I've got to go by is what I had known as a 25-year-old guy, and now what is prevalent in this country today, I wouldn't believe it. It's like when you throw a lobster in a pot of boiling water, it's going to hurt, but if you throw that lobster in a pot of just regular water and then turn the heat up, for all intents and purposes, before the lobster figures it out, it's too late and he's gone anyway. We Christians are painted with the same brush of political correctness. I'm going to speak this morning on the subject of spanking, for instance. And I will virtually guarantee that at least 50% of the Christians who hear this message are going to disagree with it. Because we have been so politically correct in society's assessment, the pressure that we're under, the convenience, the lack of stress that spanking, brings into our lives. We don't want to hurt our little kids. We want to project an atmosphere of love to our kids. We don't want to see them cry. We don't want to see them hurt. We don't want to see them angry. We don't want to see them pouting. Just fill in the blank. And so we bend over backwards to not do these things. We think we're doing a great job. We love our kids. If you love your kids, you're not going to spank your kids. You're not going to beat your kid. Everybody knows that, right? I want us to have a biblical perspective of this thing. We all have our feelings about this subject. Most of those feelings are because of maybe the way our parents treated us, or because the way society has now come down on the issue. And for one reason or another, we all have an opinion on this subject. Today I want to concentrate on the biblical perspective. I couldn't give a rat's behind about what we think on certain subjects. That's the reason we're in the mess that we're in today. The pressure of political correctness has completely ruined this country. Your kid's in a restaurant. They're acting up, throwing food, throwing a tantrum. yelling, screaming, whatever it is, what do? Well, there was a time in this country, I can attest to that fact because I'm on the receiving end and I've been on the giving end, that you take that kid firmly by the wrist, you take them out of their seat, you march them out of that restaurant, either into the foyer or outside the restaurant, you lay 2 or 3 swats on their butt, they'll cry, they'll whimper, they'll howl and everything. After a few minutes, they're done, you bring them back. That's the way it used to be. I'll guarantee, if you take that kid firmly by the wrist, march him out of that restaurant, and anybody in the parking lot or in the restaurant or wherever sees you lay a hand on that kid, they're going to drop a dime on you. And you're going to get a visit, either from the cops right then and there, or somebody's going to be knocking on your door if they can track you down for child abuse. So the average Christian, they don't want that kind of pressure. They don't want that kind of attention. And so what do? We just let the kids sit there and act up. So we get swept along by the culture in which we are a part of. There's social consequences to disciplining your kid. There's legal consequences now. We've gone past the point of people just looking down their nose at you if you discipline your kid. We've got to the point now there are actual legal consequences to disciplining your kid. That's how far we've gone. I remember years ago Hillary came out with this thing about the Children's Bill of Rights or whatever. Some cockamamie thing. That the kids have all these rights. That, well, I can't be forced to go to bed at a certain time, or I can't be forced to endure a spanking if I act up, or I can't be forced to do this or that. They have all these rights. Well, look around. We're reaping the rewards of this kind of mentality right now. I mean, the millennials, for instance, they have a rep on a generic basis. I'm not talking about every individual within that group, but there is a rep that goes with these people. They couldn't give a flip about rules and regulations. If it works for them, okay. If it doesn't work for them, phooey, they're going to go their own way. And so we look around and we wonder why at 35 years old they're still living in their mom's basement. The Bible has a certain way of doing things. We have a certain way of doing things. And the two are not always compatible. You've heard me say this verse 1,000 times from Isaiah 55. God says, my ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. Well, that ought to give us pause to wake up right there. In other words, if I'm thinking a certain thought process, just because I'm thinking of it, does that in and of itself make it right? Because God just got done telling me that my thoughts are not his thoughts. My thoughts, I think, are great. My conclusions are wonderful. My sequential logic and so forth, hey, to me, it's great. Why does anybody ever argue with me? Why does anybody not see it my way? Because I'm wonderful in my own brain. God says, forget it. Your brain is not my brain. So just because we as a society and as a culture see things a certain way does not in and of itself make it right, and it does not make it biblical. The word this is a hard type of thing because this really goes against a lot of what we see and hear in the world today. the church has to be the church. We as Christians, we have to make a stand at some point that we are so intimidated by the world that we won't at this point. Proverbs chapter 14. Proverbs 14, verse 12. There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. You might have a certain philosophy about raising kids. Well, I think that when they get to be 12, 14 years old, that if they want to experiment with pot, hey, that's fine. They're in the world. They've got to live in the world. They've got to compete in the world. And I think that they ought to just try the world and see if they like it themselves. That's your philosophy. Okay. I think when they're, 14, 15 years old, they can have sex, or they can start drinking, or they can do whatever. They're their own people. They've got their own path to chart in life. It's not my job to watch over them until the day they die. They've got to sprout wings. They've got to try. They've got to experiment. That may be your philosophy. There is a way that seemeth right unto a man. That seems right to you. Oh, isn't it cute? The kid's 2 years old. They're speaking fairly good now. Just they're learning to string sentences together and so forth. And they get in your face. And they call you names, or they defy you and say, no, I won't do this, or no, I don't want that. Well, isn't that cute? Look, they're expressing themselves. They're turning into their own little human beings here. They've got a mind of their own. Isn't that nice? Okay. You wait till that same kid's 14, 15, 16 years old, and they're looking down on you, cussing you out, and you're intimidated in your own home. See how that works out for you. There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, the ends thereof, the ways of death. God has a way. We've got a way. Gee, I wonder which one's going to win out here. So what do? We're confronted with this specter of discipline with kids. We have a certain feeling about it. And just because we're Christians, that doesn't necessarily mean we have a Christian feeling about this subject. Like I said at the very outset, I guarantee 50% of the Christians are disagreeing with everything I'm saying right now. There is a biblical concept of punishment. God set this up from day one. Of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die. Cause and effect. Screw up, punishment. It's been hardwired into our DNA since day one. So why does it come as any shock when there are repercussions to our actions? Psalms. Just back to the left a speck. Psalm 89. Psalm 89, verse 7. And Psalm 89, 7 says, God is greatly to be feared in the assembly of the saints. Do you fear God? I bet 50% of the Christians don't really fear God. Because they approach him the same way that most people approach this whole concept of discipline and spanking and corporal punishment. God is greatly to be feared in the assembly of the saints, and to be had in reverence of all them that are about him. Familiarity breeds contempt. We've relegated God to a genie that is only there to give us good things and to help us out of bad things. We've relegated God to, oh God, help me in this test. Oh God, help me get this home run. Oh God, help me get this promotion. Oh God, help me to find the right guy or the right girl. Oh God, help me this. Oh God, give me that. That's what we've relegated God to. We don't fear him. We don't hold him in reverence. If we did, we wouldn't talk the way we did. We wouldn't think the way we think. We wouldn't do the things that we do. Drop down to verse 30, same chapter. Verse 30. He's talking about David here, and by extension, the analogy is for us. If his children forsake my law and walk not in my judgments, if they break my statutes and keep not my commandments, then, here comes the consequences now. We've already screwed up. We didn't keep the commandments. We didn't keep the laws. We had a course of action that we did. God says, if you do that course of action, there are consequences. There are repercussions. And here they are. Then, verse 32, will I visit their transgressions with the rod and their iniquity with stripes. Cause and effect. You can choose to thumb your nose at God, and you might think you're getting away with it, but there's a comeuppance. There's a day of reckoning. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. A lot of people, a lot of adults, when they have kids, they think back and remember the times when they were kids and the way their parents treated them. Usually, a spanking is in conjunction with anger. You're not all just sitting around the breakfast table some morning and the little bluebirds are tweeting and the mom's making the porridge and so forth, and everybody's happy and everybody's wonderful, and the dad looks around and he says, okay, who wants a beating right now? Line up. It's beating time. Doesn't work like that. Generally, if you're going to get a spanking or a beating, it's because you've screwed up. The parents are angry, and in that anger, they're either going to lay you over their lap and spank you, or they're going to find a switch or a belt or a shoe or whatever it is and whack you on the butt, and that's it. But usually they're in an anger state. I don't mean flaming red and steam coming out, because you can't overdo it. But usually the two go hand in hand, anger and punishment. God's no different. You thumb your nose at him, and he's going to take that rod, he's going to take that whip, and he's going to lay it on you. Why can't we translate that into our kid type scenario? Oh, well, anger is one of the 7 deadly sins, You're not supposed to be angry. If you're angry, you're supposed to ask God to forgive you. You're not supposed to ever get to that point that you're angry. Okay. Ephesians chapter 4. Let me ask you, you remember the time, and there was 2 times incidentally, but just, you remember the time that Jesus went into the temple and he saw the guys there, selling and buying, and it was just a whole commercial thing. It was just like an outdoor mall that they had turned it into. The temple. And Jesus just went ballistic. And he grabs that whip and he starts throwing over the tables and hitting people and knocking things over. Do you think at that moment he was angry? Or do you think, well, okay, I just got done healing the blind man here, and I just raised that person from the dead. What should I do next? Oh, I know. I'm going to go into the temple and just wreak living blank on everybody in here. No, there was something that happened in him. There was something that flipped the switch, and he got angry to the point where he lost it as far as the world would be concerned. Can you imagine the talk that went around Jerusalem that day? Oh, Jesus, the lowly man of Galilee. Oh, the one that walks around, singing to the birds and so forth and raising the... Did you see what he did today? Did you see the commotion that he caused today? And he calls himself a Christian. No self-respecting Christian would ever take a whip and hit people with it. No self-respecting Christian would overturn things and let the stupid birds loose and so forth. And they wouldn't cause the havoc that they did and the fear that they did, making people feel bad the way he did. And he calls himself a Christian. Ephesians chapter 4. Verse 26. Ephesians 4:26 says, "Be ye angry, and sin not." Huh? I thought anger in and of itself was a sin. I thought the fact of being angry denoted that you've lost a certain mental capacity to see things the way they are, or to thread the needle the way it should be. I thought if you got to that point that you were angry, you had already tipped over the edge, and it was now in the realm of sin. Remember, we started this whole thing. Our thoughts as opposed to a biblical thought. Our ways compared to God's ways. We've been told from day one that if we ever get angry, we're sinning. If you ever get angry, you're not doing right. Well, it says here, be ye angry and sin not. Obviously, you can get to an anger point at which you do sin and can sin. But the point here is that anger in and of itself does not necessarily equate with sin. You can carry it too far. Maybe if your 3-4-year-old deserves a little swat in the butt, and you sit there and you keep hitting until welts come or blood comes, you've gone too far. But to go the other way and say, well, I'm never going to hit my kid. I take pride in the fact that I never hit my kid. Good grief. Wait till you see a couple of verses coming up in a few minutes. If that's your attitude in life, that you pride yourself as a parent on the fact that you never had to spank your kid, you might feel good about that. God has a whole entirely different perspective of that same thing. So be ye angry and sin not. I'd venture to say that Jesus was so freaking angry when he went into that temple and started flipping things over and hitting people and shoving people out of the way and letting loose all their animals and so forth, that it was probably steam coming out his ears. But he didn't sin. Back to Proverbs, chapter 3. Proverbs chapter 3. Verse 11. Proverbs 3:11. My son, Despise not the chastening of the Lord. Lord's going to chasten you. You might not chasten your kids. You might not think it's a good thing to chasten anybody. But God does. Remember what I said at the beginning here. We have our ways. God has his ways. When it comes to chastening, God says, my son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. Proverbs chapter 19. Verse 18. Ooh, here we go. Chasten thy son while there is hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying. He's going to cry. Spank him with your hand, spank him with a belt, spank him with a shoe, spank him with a switch. He's going to cry. That's the whole purpose of the chastening. Get the kid's attention. So chasten thy son while there is hope. You can do that when they're 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 years old. Once they hit 14, 15, 16, no. Now it's a whole different ballgame. You can't chasten him in that way. You can deprive him of certain things. You can take the car away, 16, 17. You can ground them. You can take away privileges. Oh, you can't go to the dance, or you can't go here, you can't do this. That's not the same thing as the chastening. You've got to do that when they're younger. If you don't, you've lost it. So chasten thy son while there's hope. Let not thy soul spare for his crying. I'll tell you right now, one of the hardest things that for me as a parent was when I had to spank my kids and they would cry. It killed me. Absolutely killed me. And I knew the crying was going to come. I knew the tears were going to come. I knew the for an hour or so was going to come. I knew all that. And it killed me to have to know that this was in the works. Because some kids are really, really good at the crying aspect. Really good. Others will just sit there and look you in the eye and just say, I don't care how many hits you give me. I'm not going to cry. I'll tell you right now, that's the one that needs it the most. So it's a battle of wills. Proverbs chapter 22. Verse 15. Proverbs 22:15. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. That's just the nature of it. That's the way it goes. It's not that the kid is bad as such. It's not that the kid is flawed. It's just that's the way it is. It comes with the territory. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. I remember the other day, I was sitting there at a light, and a dad was pushing a stroller with one hand, and he had a little 2-year-old boy in the other hand. And they're in the middle of the intersection now. And the dad's got his hands full because he's got, trying to negotiate the stroller with the one hand and have that kid on the other hand. And the kid walking, little 2-year-old, he grabs away from his dad's hand and he starts running back towards the curb. I think, oh man, if a car's coming over there, he can't see what's going on here. So the dad panics and he's trying to grab the stroller and grab the kid. And now he's got the kid like a foot off the ground and just bouncing him around to keep him up there. And the kid fights it again. And he grabs, tears loose of his dad's hand. And it all just kind of falls into place when you see that. Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. The kid has no consequence, no inkling of the potential damage that's out there, ready for them. Cars coming by, somebody, fiddling, emailing or texting or changing the station or hitting their kid or whatever it happens to be, and they're not paying any attention, and they blast through that intersection. Kid has no concept of this. You can see it in everything they do. That's why they're kids. Well, the dad finally got across, but I'm thinking, boy, there's a disaster waiting for a place to happen. So foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. Okay, that's a given. But the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. Oh, you mean we just don't sit down and have a child-to-parent talk? When we explain to them the seriousness of this behavior, we don't sit here and have a little contract that me as a boy or a girl, I'm going to do this, and if I don't do that, then I'm going to have to miss the TV for tonight, or I'm going to have to go without the Sunday lunch or something. That's what we've devolved into. Contracts with our kid as far as behavior is concerned. Reward. We have stickers and stuff all over the fridge. Well, you had a good day, let's put a sticker up there for you. If you had a bad day, well, you get a reverse happy, a sad face up there. Bible says, no, you take if they have a bad day, you take a switch. You take a rod. You spank them. You don't put a stupid little reverse happy face up there. What's that? It goes right. The kid doesn't get it. There is a portion of the frontal lobe in the brain that does not develop until the kid, fully develop until the kid's in their early 20s, mid-20s. And so you get these, college-age kids out there. You get, 10, 20, 30 of them together, put a keg of beer out there, and a few girls in a bikini, and watch what happens. There's no thought of consequence. There's no thought of repercussions. There's no thought if I do this, then what happens here? The kid doesn't have that capacity. So the Bible lays down some rules and regulations in dealing with kids. But society has said, no, we don't like those. No, that doesn't fit into our program here. No, I'm not going to spank my kid. And I'll be darned if I'm going to allow anybody else to spank my kid. Whether it be the principal, whether it be a teacher, whether it be a policeman, if you touch my kid, that is it. You're in jail for the rest of your life, and I'll see to it. Started off by explaining the difference when I was a kid and society now. When I was a kid, any parent on that block, if I was over at my friend's house and I screwed up, that parent could take and whoop me upside the head, spank me until I bawled my eyes out. And when I went home and told my mom, oh, what are you crying about? Well, so-and-so's, they spanked me. They did? What did they spank you for? Well, I did this or I did that. Good. Assume the position. And I'm going to get another spanking. Not today. Teachers can't touch a kid in class. Teachers can't discipline any kid. Takes a kid 15 seconds to figure out how that pecking order goes. And so we wonder why. The schools are a mess. We wonder why society is a mess. Because the kids have learned from this age that they can get away with murder and nobody is going to touch them. Nobody's allowed to touch them. Oh, but we all love the children, don't we? No, we don't. Proverbs 23. Verse 13. Proverbs 23:13. Withhold not correction from the child, For if thou beatest him with a rod, he shall not die. See what I mean about culture, political correctness, society? We've turned 180 degrees from the biblical point of view. And we wonder why we have a problem with kids. And those kids now are adults. They're the ones that are running the show now. They're in political office. They're the teachers and professors. They're the law enforcement. They're the politicians. We've had 2 or 3 generations of this thing in progress. And now the rails are off. We've completely gone over the deep end. We had a whole generation or two that is completely in the tank on this thing. Mm-hmm. Proverbs 13. Proverbs 13 we see in verse 24. Proverbs 13:24. He that spareth his rod hateth his son. Wow. Well, I don't believe in corporal punishment. I don't believe in spanking my kid. I don't believe in whipping my kid because I love my kid. That's not what the Bible says. That's not what God says. You know, you've got your way. God has his way. There is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the ends are the ways of death. He that spareth his rod hateth his son, and he that loveth him chasten him betimes. This old English word means often. Because kids screw up often. So you spank them often. I'll end with this one. Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. Beginning at verse 6. For whom the Lord loveth. Did you get that word? For whom the Lord loveth. Not whom the Lord is ticked off at, or whom the Lord is mad at, or who the Lord, despises. Whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth. That's a step up from spanking. Trust me, the scourging. That implies a whip or a switch. And when I say a switch, I mean, we used to have trees when I was a kid, all over. Every other lot was a vacant lot. There was trees, there was, everything. And when you screwed up, your parents would say, okay, go cut me a switch. And you knew exactly what that meant, because you've been down that road before. That means a really thin little runner of a branch. Little teeny weeny thin thing that there's no real texture to it. It's just a little teeny weeny branch. And you try to find the flimsiest one you could find, but you knew it was still going to hurt. So that's a step up from the spanking. Whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and he scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. If ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? I'll tell you right now, 50% of the Christians today won't chasten their sons or daughters. 50% think it is totally immoral, sinful, sends the wrong message. I only want to convey love to my kids. Therefore, I'm not in anger going to spank any of them because that sends the wrong message. You see how convoluted and screwed up our thought process is compared to the Bible's? We think we're doing them a favor by not spanking them. The Bible says if you love them, you better spank them. See the difference? Verse 8. But if ye be without chastisement, In other words, if you don't get the spankings, if you don't get the discipline, if you don't get the chewing out, if ye be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then ye are bastards and not sons. Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh, that's our dads and so forth, which corrected us. Yeah, I know mine did. And we gave them reverence. I know I did. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? For they, this is our earthly dads, for they verily for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure. I remember one time, I'm like 12 years old, and my dad was a carpenter, so he's used to feet and inches, working in increments like that. That's what he does all day long. And I remember we're sitting in the living room one time, and somehow a discussion came up about how far something was from another thing. And I said, it's, X number of feet and inches. My dad said, oh, no. It's X number of feet and inches. He had his dimension. I had my dimension. And from that, an argument ensued. I guess he didn't like me, getting in his face, or, I'm sure I, instigated the whole thing. But his reaction was, no, I'm not going to have some 12-year-old tell me, who, works with feet and inches all day long, how far away that is. And so the argument went back and forth, and he's getting madder, and I'm getting madder. And I said, take out a tape measure and measure it. And I was right on. He was wrong, and I was right on. And that did it. He exploded. And I got one of the best beatings I ever had in my life on that one. Because his pride had been hurt. He was embarrassed. And so in anger, he gave me a beating. And it's these types of things that the folks who do not believe in spanking, they'll allude to, and they'll say, see, that's what happens when you spank. The parents get out of control, and they do it because they just feel like doing it. Or they're in a bad mood, and they're going to take it out on you. Therefore, I'm never, ever going to spank my kid. Well, the Bible acknowledges that there is a misrepresentation here from time to time, as far as we are concerned. Verse 10, for they, verily, for a few days chastened us after their own pleasure. But he, God, for our profit, that we might be partakers of his holiness. Now, no chastisement for the present seemeth to be joyous. Duh! I can attest to that. But grievous. Nevertheless, afterward, it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby. My ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. There is a way that seemeth right unto a man. The ends thereof are the ways of death. If you spare the rod, you hate your kid. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth. And he chasteneth every son whom he receiveth. He loved Paul to the nth degree. He is a chosen vessel unto me. I'm going to show him what great things he must suffer. So Paul got the beatings, he got the whippings, he got the stonings, he got the beat-ups, he got thrown in jail, he got everything. Because he was a total screw-up? No, because God loved him. If you have a problem getting past this, you have got to take it up with the Lord. You've got to read these verses yourself and decide what you're going to do with them. You can't pretend they're not there. You can't wish them away because of political correctness. You can't amend them, change them, alter them just because they don't fit into your narrative. They're there. Heavenly Father, it is very, very hard for us to get past that conception and that concept that you actually discipline sons and daughters who you love. Those of us who understand this book and know this book, this message didn't come as a complete surprise. But for a lot of Christians who are swayed by the precepts of this world, who are swayed by the fact that they think they're doing right by not disciplining their kids, who think they're doing right by trying to find some other form of punishment, such as timeouts and stickers and rewards and so forth. From a biblical concept, we know that it doesn't work, Lord. That is borne out by culture. We see it around us. Father, help us as Christians to do our part. We're all on different scales here. Some of us do not have kids yet. Some of us, our kids are old and gone out of the house. Some of us have grandkids. So Lord, help each and every one of us be in tune with you. Impart to our kids who might have kids what they should do. God, this is a hard subject. I've struggled with this all morning, Lord. I felt like a complete idiot out here. I'm stammering. I'm losing my trend of thought. I'm having to reverse myself, back up, and everything else. I'm having a horrible time from a spiritual standpoint of trying to get this stuff out. And I know from whence I'm having this trouble. Satan does not want this stuff out there. He does not want us to line up with a biblical view. So, Father, all I can do is fall back on the Holy Spirit and trust that these stumbling and faltering words will fall on some fertile soil someplace, that the verses that we've looked at this morning will bear fruit somewhere, and that God will be glorified, that in at least some of our hearts and lives that order will be reestablished. In some of our lives that the pecking order would be set back in place. Father, we need help. And I ask the Lord of all creation, the sustainer of this universe, to help such as us in this matter. In Jesus' name.